Cameras were supposed to capture a luxurious morning segment on modern air travel, but instead they broadcasted a career-ending moment of pure arrogance. When a smug flight attendant decided to publicly humiliate a black passenger over her natural hair in first class, she had no idea the woman sitting quietly before her was not only powerful, but that millions were watching live. What happened next destroyed one woman's life and left viewers completely speechless. Keep watching to uncover the shocking twist. Fluorescent lights buzzed high above Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport, casting a sterile, clinical glow over the exhausted masses of early morning travelers. It was barely 5 o'clock in the morning, a time when the world usually felt muted and forgiving, but inside the sprawling glass and steel cathedral of modern aviation, the frenetic energy of the day had already begun. Gate B-22 was a swarm of rolling luggage, spilled coffee, and half-awake passengers waiting to board Flight 804 to Los Angeles. Standing quietly near the priority boarding lane was Naomi Reynolds. At 34, Naomi carried herself with the quiet, unshakable grace of a woman who had spent her entire life walking into rooms that were not built for her, only to eventually own them. She was dressed impeccably but comfortably for the cross-country journey. A thick, oversized cream cashmere sweater, tailored charcoal trousers, and a pair of pristine white sneakers. Slung over her shoulder was a heavy black Toomey duffel bag, inside of which rested the signed contracts that would forever change the trajectory of her life. Just 12 hours prior, Naomi had finalized a 9-figure acquisition deal with Sephora for her luxury organic haircare line, Crown Aesthetics. She was exhausted to her very bones, but the deep, quiet hum of victory vibrated in her chest with every breath she took. Above all, Naomi's most striking feature was her hair. It was a glorious, meticulously cared-for afro, a perfectly sculpted halo of thick, natural 4C coils that framed her rich, mahogany complexion. Her hair was not merely an aesthetic choice. It was the literal foundation of her empire. It was a crown she wore with profound pride, a testament to years of fighting corporate beauty standards that demanded she shrink herself, flatten her texture, and assimilate. Today, her afro was picked out to its fullest, most voluminous extent, catching the harsh airport lighting and softening it into something beautiful. As the gate agent finally announced the boarding call for first class and Diamond Medallion members, Naomi adjusted her bag, flashed her digital boarding pass, and walked down the jet bridge. The air grew cooler, the familiar scent of aviation fuel and circulated air conditioning washing over her as she stepped onto the massive Boeing 777. Waiting at the aircraft door was Chloe Harrington. Chloe had been a senior flight attendant for nearly 2 decades. At 42, she was fiercely protective of her seniority and viewed the first-class cabin not as a shared public accommodation, but as her own personal kingdom. Her uniform was tailored so tightly it looked restrictive. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a rigid, immovable helmet, and her lips were painted a stark, matte crimson. Over the years, the glamour of flying had entirely worn off for Chloe, replaced by a bitter, simmering resentment toward the world. She possessed a terrifying ability to weaponize a polite smile, using it as a shield, while she dispensed microaggressions to anyone she deemed unworthy of her cabin. When Naomi stepped through the cabin door, Chloe's sharp green eyes immediately darted toward her. The smile on the flight attendant's face did not waver, but it froze, turning brittle and tight. Chloe's gaze flicked up and down, taking in Naomi's casual cashmere, her lack of ostentatious designer logos, and finally her hair. The magnificent, unapologetic volume of Naomi's afro seemed to trigger something dark and resentful deep within Chloe's chest. In Chloe's rigidly defined worldview, first-class passengers looked a certain way. They wore crisp business suits. They carried themselves with a certain aloof detachment, and they certainly did not take up space so boldly. "Good morning," Naomi said, her voice warm and melodic, offering a polite nod as she stepped into the cabin. Chloe stepped laterally, blocking the aisle just enough to force Naomi to pause. "Excuse me, miss," Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, loud enough for the already seated passengers to hear. "I believe you might have missed the announcement. We are only boarding first class and are premium status members right now. Main cabin boarding will commence in about 15 minutes. Naomi blinked, the exhaustion in her eyes momentarily giving way to a flicker of exasperated recognition. She knew this dance. She had danced it 1,000 times before in luxury boutiques, high-end restaurants, and corporate boardrooms. It was the immediate, knee-jerk assumption that she did not belong. "I am in first class," Naomi replied evenly, keeping her voice entirely devoid of the defensive anger Chloe was clearly trying to provoke. She held up her phone, the screen brightly displaying seat 2A. Chloe leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she scrutinized the digital boarding pass, as if suspecting it were a clever forgery. She took an agonizingly long time reading the screen, her crimson lips pursing into a tight line. Finally, unable to dispute the digital evidence, she took a half step back, though she did not apologize. "Seat 2A, right this way then," Chloe murmured coldly, gesturing down the wide aisle. As Naomi walked past her, she distinctly heard Chloe let out a sharp, theatrical sigh, a sound designed specifically to communicate profound inconvenience. Naomi ignored her. She had bigger things to focus on, like the champagne she planned to order before takeoff and the 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep she desperately needed. She walked down the plush, carpeted aisle of the first-class cabin, making her way to the second row. As she approached her seat, she noticed the man sitting in 2B across the aisle. He was a middle-aged white man with striking silver hair, wearing a sharp navy blazer over a crisp white shirt. He had an elaborate, highly professional camera rig mounted on a small, stabilizing tripod attached to his tray table. Wires connected the camera to a high-end laptop, and a small, discreet microphone was clipped to his lapel. This was Andrew Horton's. Andrew was a veteran senior producer and on-air correspondent for Dawn to Dusk, one of the highest-rated morning news television broadcasts in the country. Today, Andrew was not traveling for leisure. He was on assignment. The network was doing a live, interactive segment titled "The Return of First-Class Luxury," aiming to show viewers the revamped amenities of premium travel following a major airline industry overhaul. The segment was scheduled to go live directly from the aircraft in just a few minutes, broadcasting to over 6 million morning viewers. Andrew was currently running diagnostic checks, adjusting the aperture on his camera to account for the cabin lighting, and speaking softly into his earpiece to the control room back in Manhattan. "Good morning," Naomi whispered politely to Andrew as she hoisted her Toomey bag into the overhead bin. Andrew looked up, flashing a genuine warm smile. "Morning. Looks like we're the early birds today," he replied, tapping his camera lens playfully. "Don't worry. I'm doing a quick live television spot for a morning show, but I'll make sure the camera stays pointed squarely at my ugly mug. I won't catch you in the background while you're trying to sleep." "I appreciate that," Naomi chuckled softly, instantly liking the man. "Unless I start drooling in my sleep, in which case, feel free to use it for comedic relief." Andrew laughed, a hearty, booming sound. Deal, have a great flight. Naomi slid into her spacious leather seat, adjusting the heavy seatbelt around her waist. She leaned her head back against the pristine white headrest, letting out a long, shuddering breath. The plush leather felt like a cloud. She closed her eyes, ready to let the white noise of the aircraft lull her into a deep, well-deserved slumber. The tension of the past week's relentless negotiations began to melt away from her shoulders. She was finally going home, but her peace was destined to be fleeting. From the front galley, the sharp, aggressive click-clack of Chloe Harrington's standard issue heels grew louder, marching down the aisle with the rhythmic intensity of a predator closing in on its prey. Chloe stopped abruptly beside row 2. The flight attendant stood tall, her posture rigidly straight, her hands clasped tightly in front of her crisp navy uniform. She stared down at Naomi, who was resting with her eyes closed. Chloe's gaze was fixated entirely on Naomi's hair. In the soft ambient lighting of the cabin, Naomi's afro was magnificent, a testament to natural beauty. It did not spill into the aisle, nor did it encroach upon the neighboring seat. It simply occupied the space around Naomi's head, majestic and entirely unobtrusive to anyone operating with basic common sense. But to Chloe, it was a target. "Excuse me, Miss Reynolds," Chloe said. Her voice was no longer masked with artificial sweetness. It was loud, authoritative, and sharp, designed to carry through the quiet cabin and attract the attention of the other boarding passengers. Naomi opened her eyes, blinking away the onset of sleep. She looked up at the flight attendant, feeling a cold, familiar knot tighten in her stomach. "Yes, I am going to need you to do something about your hair," Chloe stated, gesturing vaguely toward Naomi's head with a manicured hand. For a fraction of a second, the cabin around them seemed to go entirely silent. The soft jazz music playing over the speakers felt entirely disconnected from the sudden, heavy tension dropping over row 2. Across the aisle, Andrew Horton's froze, his fingers hovering over his laptop keyboard. He slowly turned his head, his brow furrowing in disbelief at what he had just heard. "I'm sorry," Naomi asked, her voice calm but layered with a dangerous, quiet edge. "Do something about my hair?" "Yes," Chloe replied, raising her chin defiantly. She spoke slowly, as if addressing a small, unintelligent child. "Your hair is excessively large. It is protruding beyond the confines of your designated seating area. It constitutes a safety hazard and a disruption to the cabin environment." Naomi stared at her. For a moment, she genuinely wondered if she was hallucinating from sleep deprivation. She looked to her left. The window was inches away. She looked to her right. Her hair was entirely contained within the massive wings of the first-class headrest. It wasn't touching the aisle. It wasn't touching the ceiling. It was simply existing on her head. "My hair is not in the aisle, nor is it a safety hazard," Naomi said, her voice remaining miraculously steady. She had built her entire multi-million-dollar company to combat exactly this type of archaic, deeply rooted prejudice. She refused to let this bitter woman diminish her. "It is natural hair. I am sitting in my seat, fully compliant with all FAA regulations. I am not moving, and I am not changing my hair." Chloe's face flushed, a mottled, angry red creeping up her neck. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone she had already decided was beneath her. "Miss Reynolds," Chloe said, her voice raising another octave, ensuring that the businessman in row 1 and the elderly couple in row 3 were now actively watching the exchange. "We maintain a strict standard of decorum and hygiene in the premium cabin. Your current hairstyle is unruly. It is inappropriate for this environment. I am asking you to either tie it back, compress it into a scarf, or put on a hat." If you cannot comply with basic cabin standards, I will have to ask you to relocate to the rear of the aircraft, where there is more space. The sheer audacity of the insult hung in the air like toxic smoke. Decorum, hygiene, unruly. The words were heavily coded, dripping with undeniable racial prejudice. Chloe was not asking Naomi to move a bag. She was publicly attacking her dignity, her identity, and her right to exist in a luxury space. Naomi felt a rush of adrenaline flood her veins. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by a crystalline, razor-sharp focus. She slowly uncrossed her legs and sat up straight, locking eyes with the flight attendant. My hair is thoroughly clean, expertly styled, and perfectly appropriate for any cabin on this aircraft, Naomi said, her voice projecting clearly, vibrating with quiet, devastating authority. You are not enforcing a safety policy. You are enforcing your own personal prejudice. You are attempting to humiliate me because you do not like the way my natural black hair looks. I will not tie it back. I will not cover it. And I absolutely will not move to the back of the plane. Chloe literally gasped, clutching a hand to her chest as if she had been physically struck. How dare you? The flight attendant hissed, her professionalism completely disintegrating. How dare you accuse me of such a thing? I am the senior purser on this flight. I dictate what is and is not a safety hazard. Your massive hair is a hazard. It is a visual obstruction. You are being completely non-compliant and hostile. The only hostility here is coming from you, Naomi replied, never breaking eye contact, never raising her voice to match Chloe's frantic, escalating pitch. I am sitting quietly in the seat I paid thousands of dollars for. You went out of your way to approach me and insult my physical appearance. Now I suggest you walk away and attend to your actual duties before this escalates into a situation you cannot control. But Chloe was far past the point of rational retreat. Her ego had been wounded, and in her mind her authority was absolute. She leaned down, bracing her hands on the armrests of Naomi's seat, invading her personal space in a blatant display of intimidation. Listen to me very carefully, Chloe sneered, her voice dropping to a vicious, venomous whisper. You might think you can pull this attitude on the ground, but up here, I am the law. You will compress that ridiculous mess on your head, or I will personally go to the cockpit, inform Captain Miller that we have an aggressive, uncooperative passenger, and I will have you dragged off this aircraft by Port Authority police. Do you understand me? You will conform, or you will be removed. The threat was explicit. It was the ultimate trump card, used to silence and terrify minority passengers. The threat of law enforcement, the threat of being labeled aggressive, the very real danger of being forcibly removed from a flight simply for existing. Chloe smiled, a tight, triumphant smirk, waiting for Naomi to break, waiting for the fear to set in, waiting for the capitulation she felt she was owed. What Chloe did not know, what she could not possibly have comprehended in her blind, arrogant rage, was that she was not just threatening Naomi Reynolds. She was threatening her in front of a live, broadcasting television camera. Across the aisle in seat 2B, Andrew Horton sat frozen, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Just 2 minutes prior, Andrew had received the countdown in his earpiece from the control room back at the Dawn to Dusk Studio in Manhattan. The show's anchors, Diane and Robert, had just tossed the segment to him. The little red light on the front of his high-definition, professional-grade broadcast camera had blinked on. He was live. Millions of people across the country, families eating breakfast, commuters watching on their phones, gym-goers staring at the screens above their treadmills, were tuned in. Andrew had just opened his mouth to deliver his cheerful, scripted introduction about the plush new leather seats and the upgraded champagne menu when Chloe Harrington had marched down the aisle and launched her unprovoked, racist attack on the woman sitting directly across from him. A veteran journalist with 30 years of hard news experience, Andrew's instincts took over faster than his conscious mind could process. He didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. Instead, with agonizingly slow, precise movements, Andrew reached out and grasped the panning handle of his tripod. Smoothly, silently, he rotated the camera lens exactly 45 degrees to his left. The frame shifted. Andrew's face slid out of the shot, and the camera locked perfectly onto seat 2A. The framing was cinematic in its perfection. The high-definition lens captured Naomi's stoic, beautiful profile, her magnificent afro illuminated by the overhead reading light. Standing over her, perfectly in focus, was Chloe. The microphone clipped to Andrew's lapel was highly sensitive, designed to pick up ambient audio in loud environments. In the relatively quiet, pre-takeoff hush of the first-class cabin, it picked up every single word. In the control room in New York, absolute chaos had erupted, followed instantly by a stunned, breathless silence. The executive producer, a hardened television veteran named Sarah, had initially screamed into Andrew's earpiece, demanding to know why he was panning off script. But as the audio of Chloe demanding Naomi do something about her excessively large hair flooded into the control room, Sarah realized exactly what she was looking at. Kill the graphic. Sarah barked at her technical director, her voice trembling with adrenaline. Take the lower third off the screen. Turn Andrew's mic gain up by 20%. Do not cut away. I repeat, do not cut away from camera 4. Let it play. Back in the studio, the anchors, Diane and Robert, were staring at their monitors in open-mouthed horror. They were seasoned professionals, but nothing could prepare them to witness a raw, unfiltered civil rights violation unfolding live on their morning broadcast. On the plane, Andrew remained completely still. He held his breath, staring at his laptop screen, which displayed the live feed. The viewership numbers in the corner of his screen, usually hovering around 6 million for this time slot, began to behave erratically. People were texting their friends. People were waking up their spouses. The numbers began to climb at a staggering, unprecedented rate. 6.5 million, 7 million. Unaware of the lens staring directly at her, completely ignorant of the millions of eyes burning into her back, Chloe doubled down on her horrific threat. I will have you dragged off this aircraft by Port Authority police. Do you understand me? You will conform, or you will be removed. The words echoed through the microphone, echoing through millions of television speakers across the globe. The sheer venom in Chloe's voice, the racist undertones of the word conform, the brutal threat of police violence against a peaceful black woman sitting quietly in her seat. It was a devastating, irrefutable display of bigotry. Naomi did not flinch. She looked at Chloe, her expression shifting from calm defense to a quiet, terrifying resolve. Naomi was a woman who had built an empire from scratch. She was a woman who navigated boardrooms full of ruthless billionaires. She was not intimidated by a flight attendant on a power trip. You want to call the captain? Naomi asked, her voice crystal clear, completely devoid of fear. You want to call Port Authority? Please do, in fact, I insist upon it. But before you do, I want you to explicitly state, for the record, what regulation I am breaking. Show me the exact line in your airline's policy manual that states natural, afro-textured hair is a flight risk. Chloe scoffed a vicious, ugly sound. I don't need to show you a manual. It is standard operating procedure. Your hair is an obstruction. It is messy, it is unhygienic, and it is offensive to the premium passengers who paid good money for a clean, orderly environment. In his earpiece, Andrew heard his executive producer gasp. She actually said unhygienic. Oh my God, Andrew, hold that shot. Offensive, Naomi repeated, a sharp, bitter smile finally breaking across her face. My hair is offensive to you? Yes, Chloe snapped, completely abandoning any pretense of customer service. It is entirely unprofessional. Now I am going to the front galley. When I come back in exactly 2 minutes, you will either have that mess wrapped in a scarf, or I am calling the authorities to have you escorted out in handcuffs. Make your choice. With a dramatic, aggressive pivot, Chloe spun on her heels and marched back toward the front of the aircraft, disappearing behind the navy blue curtain separating the galley from the cabin. The moment she was gone, Andrew let out a long, shaky breath. He slowly turned the camera back to himself. His face was pale, his expression one of profound shock and solemnity. He looked directly into the lens. Diane Robert, Andrew said, his voice grave, broadcasting to an audience that had just swelled past 8 million viewers. I think we are going to pivot from our planned segment. What you all just witnessed here on Flight 804 was not a rehearsal. It was not a stunt. That was a completely unprovoked, live incident. Naomi, hearing Andrew speak, turned her head. She saw the glowing red light on the camera. She saw the wires. She saw Andrew's grim expression. It took her only a fraction of a second to put the pieces together. Were you? Naomi started, her eyes widening slightly as she looked from the camera to Andrew. Were you filming that? Andrew didn't mute his microphone. He looked at Naomi with deep respect and empathy. Ma'am, Andrew said gently, ensuring his voice carried to the millions watching. I am a senior producer for Dawn to Dusk on the National Broadcast Network. We have been broadcasting live for the last 4 minutes. Every single word that woman just said to you, it was just broadcast live to millions of people. Naomi sat back in her seat stunned. The weight of the revelation washed over her. She had been prepared to fight this battle the hard way, with lawyers, with complaints, with the exhaustive, traumatizing labor of trying to prove her word against an airline employee. But she didn't have to. The universe, in a stroke of absolute poetic justice, had handed her the ultimate weapon. The truth was out. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Naomi's face. The exhaustion was completely gone now. She looked toward the front curtain, where Chloe Harrington was presumably calling the captain, entirely unaware that her life as she knew it was already over. Well, Naomi said softly, adjusting her beautiful, majestic hair with a graceful flick of her wrist. Let her call the police. I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation. In the control room, Sarah slammed her hand on the desk. Get me the PR department of this airline on the phone right now, she yelled to her production assistants. And call the port authority at JFK. This flight isn't going anywhere. Meanwhile, behind the curtain, Chloe picked up the intercom phone to call the flight deck, a smug, self-satisfied smirk on her face, entirely oblivious to the monumental storm she had just unleashed upon herself. Behind the thick navy curtain of the forward galley, Chloe Harrington lifted the heavy plastic intercom receiver with a triumphant, vindictive smirk. She punched the access code for the flight deck, waiting for the familiar chime to connect her to Captain James Miller. In her mind, she had already won. She had played this exact card 6 times over her career, weaponizing airline safety protocols to force compliance from passengers she simply did not like. It was a flawless system. It was always her word against theirs, and the airline universally backed their senior flight crews. Flight deck, Miller speaking. The captain's gruff, tired voice crackled through the receiver. "Captain, it's Chloe," she said, artificially injecting a slight tremor into her voice to simulate distress. "We have a severe situation in the first-class cabin. I am going to need you to halt the pushback sequence and contact Port Authority immediately. I need law enforcement at the forward door." There was a heavy pause on the line. "What's the issue, Chloe?" "We have clearance to push in 5 minutes. Passenger in 2A is being highly aggressive and completely non-compliant." Chloe lied effortlessly, her eyes scanning the galley to ensure she was alone. "She is blatantly violating safety protocols regarding cabin obstructions. When I politely asked her to secure her massive unruly hair, she became hostile. She is refusing direct crew member instructions and creating an unsafe environment for the premium passengers. I do not feel safe closing the main cabin door with her on board." Captain Miller sighed heavily. "Understood. I will radio ground control and request Port Authority. Secure the galley and wait for the officers." "Thank you, Captain," Chloe whispered, hanging up the phone. She smoothed down her tailored uniform skirt, checked her matte red lipstick in the reflective surface of the beverage cart, and took a deep, satisfying breath. She was about to teach Naomi Reynolds a harsh lesson about exactly who held the power. However, thousands of miles away from the insulated bubble of Flight 804, a catastrophic corporate meltdown of epic proportions was already underway. In a luxury high-rise condominium in downtown Chicago, the frantic ringing of a bedside telephone shattered the early morning silence. Richard Gable, the executive vice president of public relations for the airline, groaned and blindly reached for the handset. It was 4:15 a.m. Central Time. A call at this hour meant an aircraft had either gone off a runway or someone high-profile had died in their seats. "Gable," he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Richard, turn on the television. Dawn to dusk." Right now, his deputy director of communications screamed through the speaker, her voice shrill with absolute panic. "Do not ask questions, just turn it on." Frowning, Richard grabbed his remote and flicked on the massive flat screen mounted across his bedroom. The national broadcast feed of Dawn to Dusk materialized, but it was not the usual polished studio feed. It was a raw, slightly shaky camera angle from inside one of his own airline's first-class cabins. The banner across the bottom of the screen read in bold, flashing letters, "Breaking. Live civil Preitskin on Flight 804. Richard watched in mounting, cold-blooded horror as the network replayed the footage from just minutes prior. He heard the crystal-clear audio of Chloe Harrington's voice, practically dripping with racist venom. He heard the words hygiene, unruly, and conform. He watched, paralyzed, as one of his senior flight attendants explicitly threatened to weaponize the police against a perfectly calm, seated black woman simply because of her natural hair. "Oh my God," Richard whispered, the blood draining completely from his face. "Tell me this is a deep fake. Tell me this is a prank." "It's live, Richard," his deputy said frantically. "Andrew Hortons was doing a scheduled live spot for our new luxury rollout. She walked right into the frame and did this on national television. The clip has been on Twitter for exactly 4 minutes, and it already has 2 million views. The NBACP just tagged us. The ACLU just tagged us. The stock price in pre-market trading has already dropped 3%. Richard leaped out of bed, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was not just a PR disaster. It was an extinction-level brand event. The woman in the video was not being disruptive. She was sitting gracefully in her seat, being subjected to a blatant, undeniable hate crime under the guise of airline policy. And the flight attendant was wearing their logo, representing their brand, on a plane painted with their colors. "Where is that aircraft?" Richard roared, sprinting toward his home office, JFB 22. "It hasn't pushed back yet," the deputy replied. "Call dispatch. Call the ground manager at JFK. Get on the emergency radio frequency with the flight deck of 804 right now," Richard commanded, his voice echoing through the empty apartment. "Do whatever it takes, but do not let that plane leave the gate. And get Port Authority on the phone. If they drag that innocent woman off that plane on live television, we will be sued into bankruptcy by noon. Move." Back in New York, the oblivious architect of this disaster stepped out from behind the galley curtain. Chloe Harrington carried herself with the smug, untouchable aura of a monarch returning to her throne. She walked slowly down the aisle, coming to a halt right beside row 2. Naomi Reynolds was still sitting peacefully in seat 2A. Across the aisle, Andrew Hortons had his camera rolling, the red broadcast light glowing steadily like a beacon of absolute truth. Chloe barely registered the camera. To her, Andrew was just another passenger playing with a laptop. "The captain has contacted the authorities," Chloe announced, her voice artificially loud, ensuring the entire cabin could hear her victory. "Port Authority officers are walking down the jet bridge as we speak. This is your absolute final warning. Compress your hair, or you will be arrested for interfering with a flight crew." Naomi slowly turned her head. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by the lethal, quiet confidence of a titan who knew she held all the cards. She looked Chloe up and down, a faint, almost pitying smile touching her lips. "Chloe, isn't it?" Naomi asked softly, reading the gold name tag pinned to the flight attendant's chest. "I want you to remember this exact moment. I want you to remember the choice you made right here, because it is the last choice you will ever make in this uniform." Chloe let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Are you threatening me? Add that to the police report." Heavy boots thudded loudly against the metal grating of the jet bridge. 2 large, heavily armed Port Authority police officers stepped through the forward aircraft door. Their expressions were grim and professional, hands resting securely on their utility belts. The atmosphere in the cabin instantly shifted, the ambient tension snapping tight like a coiled spring. Passengers in the surrounding rows sat perfectly still, holding their breath as the officers made their way down the aisle. Chloe's eyes lit up with malicious delight. She immediately stepped toward the officers, putting on her best performance of a distressed, besieged professional. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," Chloe sighed dramatically, gesturing sharply toward Naomi. "This is the passenger, seat 2A. She has been incredibly aggressive, completely uncooperative, and is blatantly refusing to comply with federal aviation safety standards regarding cabin obstructions. When I attempted to de-escalate, she became hostile. We need her removed from the aircraft immediately so we can push back." The lead officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Sergeant O'Connor, looked past Chloe and assessed the situation. He expected to see a screaming, combative passenger, perhaps someone intoxicated or violently throwing luggage. Instead, he saw Naomi Reynolds sitting perfectly still, hands neatly folded in her lap, her magnificent hair glowing under the cabin lights, looking as dangerous as a librarian reading a book. Before O'Connor could even speak, the heavy reinforced door of the flight deck swung violently open. Captain James Miller burst out of the cockpit. He was completely out of breath, his face ghostly pale and dripping with nervous sweat. He was holding a red emergency communication handset that was directly wired to the airline's corporate dispatch center. He looked like a man who had just narrowly avoided stepping on a landmine. "Stand down, officers. Do not touch that passenger," Captain Miller bellowed, his voice echoing off the curved walls of the fuselage. Chloe spun around, her triumphant smile freezing and slowly melting into a mask of pure confusion. "Captain, what are you doing?" "She's the threat." "Shut your mouth, Harrington," Captain Miller snapped, his voice vibrating with a level of furious authority that made the veteran flight attendant physically recoil. He practically sprinted down the aisle until he was standing between the police officers and Naomi. The captain took a deep, trembling breath, desperately trying to regain his composure. He looked directly into the lens of Andrew Horton's camera, recognizing the glowing red light of the live broadcast for what it was. Then he turned his attention to Naomi. "Miss Reynolds," Captain Miller said, his voice trembling slightly. He recognized her name from the passenger manifest, but the frantic voice of Richard Gable, screaming through his headset, had just provided the rest of the context. "My deepest, most profound apologies. No one is removing you from this aircraft. You are absolutely not in violation of any safety protocol." Chloe's jaw dropped, the color completely drained from her heavily made-up face. "Captain, what are you talking about? She is completely non-compliant. Her hair is a hazard. You cannot undermine my authority in front of the passengers." "Your authority?" A new booming voice echoed through the cabin. Andrew Horton's had reached over and turned up the volume on his laptop speakers. He had a direct audio feed from his executive producer in New York, who had just patched in Richard Gable, the airline's VP of Public Relations, straight into the broadcast mix. "Chloe Harrington," Richard Gable's voice thundered out of the laptop speakers, crystal clear and echoing with corporate fury. "My name is Richard Gable, Executive Vice President of this airline. You are currently speaking on a live, nationally syndicated television broadcast being watched by over 10 million people. The entire world just watched you invent a safety violation to systematically harass and threaten a black passenger over her natural hair." Chloe physically staggered backward. Her knees suddenly lost their structural integrity, and she had to grip the edge of the overhead bin to keep from collapsing. Her eyes darted frantically toward Andrew's seat, finally realizing that the large camera rig was not just a hobbyist's toy. The red light was staring at her, an unblinking, merciless eye broadcasting her bigotry to the globe. "Live," Chloe whispered, her voice cracking, all of her arrogant bravado evaporating into thin air. "No, that's a violation of privacy. You can't film me." "You are in a public space, Harrington," Gable's voice continued relentlessly through the speakers, offering absolutely zero mercy. "You have not only disgraced this uniform, but you have exposed this company to catastrophic liability. You do not dictate safety policy based on your personal prejudices." Naomi finally stood up. When she rose to her full height, she completely commanded the space. She didn't look angry. She looked like a sovereign issuing a final decree. "For the record," Naomi said, her voice smooth, powerful, and projecting perfectly into Andrew's microphone. "Since you were so concerned about my professionalism, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Naomi Reynolds. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Crown Aesthetics, a multinational beauty brand specifically dedicated to the care and celebration of natural black hair, a company I just sold yesterday for 9 figures. A collective gasp echoed through the first-class cabin. Passengers who had been quietly watching the drama unfold were now staring at Naomi with wide-eyed awe. "I spend my life fighting the exact archaic racist beauty standards you just tried to enforce on this aircraft," Naomi continued, taking a step toward the trembling flight attendant. You thought I was an easy target. You thought, because I didn't fit your narrow, prejudiced view of what wealth and belonging look like, that you could bully me into submission. But you picked the wrong woman, on the wrong day, in front of the wrong camera. Captain Miller turned to the Port Authority officers, who were now standing completely still, recognizing the absolute radioactive nature of the situation. Officers, Captain Miller said, his tone authoritative and definitive. The passenger in 2A has committed no crime and violated no policies. However, the employee standing before you is currently causing a massive disruption to the flight and is relieved of duty, effective immediately. He turned to Chloe, his eyes hard and completely devoid of sympathy. Get your bags, Chloe. You are off my plane. Captain, please, Chloe begged, hot tears of sudden desperate panic streaming down her face, ruining her meticulous makeup. I have 20 years of seniority. I have a pension. You can't just throw me off. I don't have to, the voice of Richard Gable cut in coldly from the laptop. As of 3 minutes ago, Human Resources processed your immediate termination. You are no longer an employee of this airline. Officers, please escort this civilian off the aircraft so we can begin our departure procedures. Chloe Harrington stood completely paralyzed, her entire universe collapsing in the span of 5 minutes. The sheer magnitude of her ruin crashed down upon her. She hadn't just lost an argument. She had lost her career, her pension, and her reputation. Her face would be plastered across every news network and social media platform in the world by sunrise. She was utterly destroyed. Sergeant O'Connor stepped forward, not with the aggressive force Chloe had hoped to see unleashed on Naomi, but with the firm, unyielding grip of the law. He placed a hand on Chloe's elbow. Ma'am, you need to gather your belongings and come with us, the officer said sternly. Now, the silence inside first-class cabin of Flight 804 was no longer tense. It was heavy with the gravitational pull of absolute justice. Chloe Harrington, stripped of her authority, her title, and her dignity, stared blankly at the massive hand of Sergeant O'Connor resting on her navy blue sleeve. The pristine, rigid world she had controlled for 2 decades had just been vaporized in the span of a few catastrophic minutes. My bags, Chloe whispered, her voice completely hollow. She sounded like a ghost. They are in the forward closet. I will retrieve them for you, Captain Miller said. He did not look at her with pity. He looked at her with the deep, exhausting resentment of a man whose career had just been put in jeopardy by the sheer malicious stupidity of a subordinate. The captain walked to the front galley, pulled out Chloe's rolling suitcase and her matching tote bag, and wheeled them back down the aisle. He handed the handle to the officer, intentionally avoiding brushing Chloe's hand. Let's go, ma'am, Sergeant O'Connor instructed, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Chloe turned slowly. She had to walk back up the aisle, past the rows of premium passengers she had just attempted to perform her superiority for. Every single eye was locked onto her. The businessman in row 1, who had been burying his face in a spreadsheet, was openly staring in disgust. The elderly couple in row 3 shook their heads, and there, sitting in row 2, was Naomi Reynolds. As Chloe passed by, she dared to glance at the woman whose life she had tried to ruin. Naomi did not sneer. She did not mock her. She simply sat there, bathed in the soft overhead light, her magnificent crown of hair perfectly undisturbed. Naomi's expression was one of cool, profound indifference, and somehow that absolute dismissal hurt Chloe more than any insult could have. It was the ultimate confirmation of her irrelevance. As Chloe stepped off the aircraft and disappeared up the jet bridge, flanked by armed police officers, a sudden, spontaneous sound erupted from the back of the first-class cabin. It started as a single slow clap from the elderly man in row 3, but it rapidly cascaded. Within seconds, the entire cabin was applauding. It was a standing ovation for dignity, a collective exhale of relief that the villain had been vanquished before the plane even left the tarmac. Captain Miller waited for the applause to die down before turning his full attention to Naomi. He looked physically exhausted, wiping a sheen of sweat from his forehead. "Miss Reynolds," Captain Miller began, his voice dropping to a sincere, deeply apologetic register. "On behalf of myself, the flight crew, and the entire corporate leadership of this airline, I am so incredibly sorry. You should never have been subjected to that kind of treatment. It is entirely unacceptable, and it does not represent the values of this company. Is there anything at all, we can do to make you more comfortable for this flight?" Naomi looked at the captain. She knew he was terrified, acting on direct orders from executives who were currently watching their stock prices plummet in real time. But she also recognized that he had stepped in and done the right thing. "Thank you, Captain," Naomi said warmly, the hard edge completely gone from her voice. "I appreciate your intervention. Honestly, all I really want right now is a glass of champagne and to get to Los Angeles. I have been awake for 36 hours. Captain Miller let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 minutes. A genuine smile touched his face. "I will personally pour that champagne for you right now, and I will make sure no one disturbs you for the rest of the journey." As the captain hurried toward the galley to fetch her drink, Naomi turned her head to look across the aisle. Andrew Hortons was still sitting there, his laptop screen glowing, the red light on his camera finally blinking off. He was slowly taking off his earpiece, looking completely drained but wildly exhilarated. "Andrew," Naomi called softly over the hum of the aircraft's engines preparing for pushback. The veteran journalist looked up. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you," she said, her voice rich with genuine gratitude. "You didn't have to turn that camera. You risked your segment, maybe even your job, to document what was happening to me. I owe you a tremendous debt." Andrew smiled, a warm, crinkly smile that reached his eyes. He began to pack away his heavy camera rig. "Miss Reynolds, I've been a journalist for 30 years. My job is to point the lens at the truth. Today, the truth just happened to be sitting right across from me. Besides," he added with a chuckle, "my executive producer is currently screaming in my ear that our ratings just beat every other morning show combined for the decade. I think my job is incredibly safe." Naomi laughed softly, accepting the crystal flute of expensive champagne Captain Miller gently placed on her tray table. She took a slow sip, the bubbles dancing across her tongue. As the heavy cabin door finally sealed shut with a mechanical thud, isolating them from the chaos of New York, Naomi sank back into the plush leather seat. She closed her eyes, letting the gentle, vibrating hum of the jet engines wash over her. She had won the boardroom battle yesterday, but today she had won something far more profound. She had held her ground, she had protected her peace, and she had shown the world exactly what a queen looked like when her crown was challenged. By the time Flight 804 touched down on the sun-baked tarmac of Los Angeles International Airport 6 hours later, the world had completely shifted on its axis. As the wheels kissed the runway and the agonizingly slow taxi to the gate began, the chime signaling that passengers could turn off airplane mode echoed through the cabin. Naomi pulled her phone from her to-me bag and held down the power button. The moment the device connected to the cellular network, it essentially exploded. It did not just vibrate, it convulsed in her hands. Notifications poured in like a digital avalanche. Missed calls, frantic text messages, thousands of emails, and social media alerts blurring together in an endless stream. Her lock screen was a chaotic mosaic of alerts from her publicist, her legal team, her newly minted partners at Sephora, and friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Naomi tapped on the Twitter application, and the magnitude of what had transpired while she was sleeping at 30,000 feet finally became clear. She was the #1 trending topic worldwide. The hashtags Naomi Reynolds, Crown Aesthetics, and Fireclow were dominating the global conversation. The 3-minute video clip of Andrew's live broadcast had been ripped, shared, and re-uploaded tens of thousands of times. It had amassed over 80 million views across various platforms. The internet had done what the internet does best. It had mobilized with terrifying, surgical precision. Every major news outlet had picked up the story. Opinion pieces were already being published by major cultural critics discussing the policing of black women's hair in luxury spaces. The airline's public relations department had issued a massive, groveling statement confirming Chloe Harrington's termination and announcing a mandatory, company-wide overhaul of their racial bias and sensitivity training protocols. But it was the business news that made Naomi's breath catch in her throat. Her publicist, a brilliant cutthroat woman named Sarah, had left a frantic voicemail. Naomi pressed the phone to her ear as the plane pulled up to the gate. "Naomi, call me the second you land," Sarah's voice rang out, practically vibrating with excitement. "It's absolute pandemonium down here. Sephora just released a statement standing in total solidarity with you. They are pushing the Crown Aesthetics launch to the front of all their flagship stores globally. Our website traffic crashed the servers 3 times while you were in the air. Every single product we have in inventory is sold out on backorder. The 9-figure deal you signed yesterday. Naomi, your brand valuation just tripled. You are a global icon." Naomi lowered the phone, staring out the oval window at the bustling LIX tarmac. She felt a profound sense of awe wash over her. Chloe Harrington had tried to humiliate her, to compress her, to make her feel small and unworthy. Instead, Chloe's bigotry had acted as gasoline on the already raging fire of Naomi's success. The flight attendant had inadvertently broadcast the exact ethos of Crown Aesthetics to the entire planet. That natural hair was beautiful, powerful, and utterly unapologetic. When Naomi finally stepped off the plane, walking up the jet bridge with Andrew Hortons trailing slightly behind her, she was met by a wall of flashing cameras and shouting reporters waiting just outside the secure zone. Airport security had cordoned off a path for her, treating her with the deference usually reserved for visiting heads of state. Andrew patted her gently on the shoulder before peeling off toward his own network's local crew. "Give them hell, Miss Reynolds," he murmured with a wink. Naomi stepped up to the makeshift press barricade. The blinding flashes of the cameras illuminated her flawless skin and the magnificent, unbothered halo of her afro. Microphones from CNN, MSNBC, and local affiliates were thrust toward her. "Miss Reynolds, how do you feel about the airline firing the flight attendant?" one reporter shouted over the din. "Miss Reynolds, what is your message to women who face this kind of discrimination daily?" Another yelled. Naomi raised a hand, and the frantic shouting immediately died down to a hushed, reverent silence. She looked directly into the bank of television cameras, her posture impeccable, her voice carrying the undeniable weight of a woman who had just conquered the world. "What happened this morning was unfortunate, but it was not unique," Naomi said clearly, her voice echoing through the crowded terminal. Black women are constantly told to shrink themselves to make others comfortable. We are told our natural state is unprofessional, unruly, or unhygienic. But let today be a lesson. We will no longer compress our identities to fit into rooms or airplanes that refuse to expand their minds. She paused, offering a brilliant, devastating smile. As for my hair, Naomi continued, her eyes sparkling with absolute triumph, it is exactly where it belongs, taking up space. And to anyone who believes that a black woman in her natural state is a hazard to their comfort, I suggest you buckle up, because we are not moving to the back of the plane ever again. We are flying first class, and we own the airline. Thousands of miles away, sitting in a dimly lit, silent apartment in Queens, New York, Chloe Harrington stared blankly at her television screen. She watched Naomi Reynolds command the world's attention, looking radiant and utterly victorious. Chloe's uniform was crumpled on the floor. Her phone had been ringing incessantly for hours. Reporters, angry strangers who had found her number, and former friends distancing themselves. She was unemployable, publicly disgraced, and entirely alone. The power she had clung to so desperately had evaporated, leaving behind nothing but the bitter, toxic ashes of her own hatred. Naomi Reynolds turned away from the cameras, her Toomey bag slung over her shoulder, and walked out into the brilliant golden sunlight of Los Angeles. She had $1 billion empire to run, and her crown had never felt lighter. If you felt your blood boiling and then cheered for Naomi's incredible victory, you are not alone. This story is a powerful reminder that dignity, grace, and unapologetic self-worth will always triumph over ignorance and prejudice. Nobody should ever be made to feel small just to make someone else comfortable. If you loved watching this arrogant flight attendant get exactly what she deserved on live television, please hit that like button. Share this video with your friends to spread Naomi's empowering message, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking, dramatic, and satisfying real-life stories every single week.